All right. Welcome, insiders and guests. My name is Justin Rivers, Chief Experience Officer with Untapped New York. And it's noon exactly. I started right on time, not a little early. I was actually relating a story to Nicole. Everybody say hi to Nicole. Nicole is with us today again for tech support.
Hi, everybody.
Something goes wrong. And also, Nicole and I have come up with this great little gig. If by chance I get booted off for connectivity problems, Nicole's going to run a little quiz with you, a little trivia, and the winner of the trivia will get a tote bag. If, thankfully, hopefully, everybody, fingers crossed, I have no technical problems, we'll do it at the end of the tour today. I say that because I have new tenants who just moved in above me, and the cable guy is here rigging them up, and God knows what could happen. Hello, everybody. Klaus, hello. Robin, back in the Berkshires. Morbo, weather is nice. You've been stacking firewood, and you don't have a fireplace. Morbo, love it. Hello, everybody. Howard, Janelle, I hope I'm saying that right. Pete from San Francisco. Howie, hello. Elliot, Elise, Sylvia. Yes. Oh, good. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you. Pronunciation, always my least strong suit and my biggest pet peeve about myself. We have a lot of French names to talk about today. And Joe, welcome. So just want to welcome everybody today to our talk, The Art of Grand Central Terminal. Again, I see a lot of familiar faces, so I think you guys are already well indoctrinated about chatting with us on Livestorm. But if you have questions, please put the questions in the question function. Nicole and I will be monitoring them. I will go back to those at the end of the talk today. Also, for those of you who purchased a ticket to join us today, thank you for joining us. And again, our insiders are here for a monthly subscription fee as low as $10 a month, and you can join all of our virtual programming and in-person programming and get access to our 100+ archives, which are just growing every day because I mainly edit them. So I've been watching. And Martha Clark, welcome from New Hampshire. Adriana, hi from New York. Robin, thank you. We like to think it's worth the price as well. So today's talk, actually, this is the genesis of this talk, began with we have a great article that Nicole will post a little bit later on about the art in Grand Central, written by one of our talented writer interns over the summer. And I had visited a recent temporary exhibit at Grand Central in January, which really sort of drove me to the idea of, yes, let's talk about the art in Grand Central. I talk about Grand Central and the secrets of Grand Central on a sometimes multi-weekly basis. A couple times a week, I'm either in person with groups on the weekends, or I do a lot of private events now and for companies, corporate events, talking about the secrets of Grand Central. We haven't done for insiders secrets of Grand Central in a long, long time. But this is, again, going to focus on the art today. So let's just get going, shall we? And of course, the whole story has to start with this gentleman right here, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Cornelius Vanderbilt, very humbly born into farming roots, Dutch family, obviously by the last name, from the village of Bilt. In 1794, he's born in Staten Island, and he begins at the age of 15 to start his own business, bringing people back and forth from Manhattan to Staten Island by boat. This grows into a huge empire for him, a huge shipping empire. And in the 1850s, he takes his first train ride in New Jersey around the Camden area. It derails. It's an awful accident, by the way. He nearly dies. He breaks his rib, he punctures his lung. And he says, nope, trains are the wave of the future. So he starts investing in trains. This is important because a lot of the art in Grand Central Terminal that was designed for the terminal when it opened in 1913 is all to glorify the Vanderbilt family name, including this symbol. And I do start the Secrets of Grand Central Terminal tour in person and virtually with this symbol. But of course, it is an artistic symbol that you find all over in accents, in moldings above the windows, in the grills of some of the windows, especially on the viaduct. They're on the chairs. that were on the 20th Century Limited. And this is a nested G, C, and T for Grand Central Terminal. Now, there's a high symbolism in this insignia, and it is designed actually not to at first hit your eye as symbolism, but first let's just take a look at where you can see it. Again, over those beautifully sculpted moldings over the windows. We are going to talk about, which I don't normally talk about on the tour because I don't have time, the gentleman who sculpted all of those. He does have a name, and he was quite prolific. But you can also find them over the track indicators as well. Again, that nested G, C, and T. So here is an image sketched of Vanderbilt at the height of his power. Vanderbilt had, he was a very controversial figure in many ways. He was a very, very aggressive businessman. He bought up companies, sometimes very sneakily, as people would say, to make his to get to his ends. And of course, when he dies in the 1880s, he is the richest man in America, so much so that he has more money in his bank account than the United States Treasury, which, as I like to say on the tour, he died richer than America. And somebody on the Saturday tour said, that's an interesting way to think of it. And I'm like, well, that was the Vanderbilts. So you could see here, you've got the boat out in the water, which has the Vanderbilt V flying from it, and then the trains from the New York Central. Vanderbilt will begin by buying up the 3 original train lines that were chartered in Manhattan: the Harlem, the Hudson, and the New Haven line. So looking back at that symbol, his nickname was the Commodore. Trains and boats, you turn that symbol over, what does that look like? Well, the T is both a dual anchor and train front, but also the nested C and G also help you to see a train sort of coming at you with an anchor at the head. Dual symbolism for Cornelius Vanderbilt. And a lot of the art that we will talk about today is Vanderbilt-centric. Now, how I designed this, much like for those of you who joined me with Subway Art a couple of weeks ago, I'm using a map of Grand Central so you can roughly know where some of this stuff is. We are going to treat Grand Central kind of like a gallery. And I walked around the other day just looking at the art, and you could spend a good hour, even more, if you want to photograph it well, just looking at the art pieces, hopefully some of which may be a surprise to you by the end of this tour. And I have saved my last piece as the favorite. It is my favorite, and it's in a very strange place. But we're going to start from the outside, moving in, and outside we're going to start with the oldest pieces of art and then move inside. Guiding you today will be my bluish arrow. I tried to match the color of the ceiling mural, but it didn't work quite well. That's as close as I could get, but we are going to start with the 42nd Street facade outside. This is the first, I like to call it back of the envelope sketch for the 42nd Street facade, signed by Whitney Warren of Warren and Wetmore, the architects who designed Grand Central with architects Reed and Stem. As you can see, he signed it. He said the original sketch of the facade of the Grand Central Terminal, New York. Art within itself. Boy, if I had this, I'd frame it and put it somewhere beautiful. And there are the 3 iconic windows. What we're going to do is look at the actual manifestation of that. This was taken by Michelle Young on the viaduct, lucky duck herself who got up there. I still have not been able to get up there as a pedestrian because technically you're not allowed. But if you look at the statuary the statue in the center window, there he is. That is Cornelius Vanderbilt himself. And this is the oldest piece of art in Grand Central Terminal because it was made not for Grand Central Terminal. It wasn't even made for Grand Central Station, and it wasn't even made for Grand Central Depot. It was made for a freight depot of the Hudson line down on the footprint where roughly the entry to the Holland Tunnel is today in Lower Manhattan. And it is an 8.5 foot tall solid bronze statue of Cornelius Vanderbilt. As you can see, he is wearing a fur trim jacket. He's got one hand on his chest and one hand looking out. So the hand on his chest is supposed to symbolize, the strength of his character, and the hand pointing out is supposed to be sort of the idea of forward movement. everything about Grand Central and the Vanderbilts was supposed to be about plenty, wealth, and progress, as we'll see in the statue grouping above his head in a minute. I always say it looks kind of Napoleonic. It's supposed to be Jeffersonian. And here is the picture of it in its original home at the freight depot of the Hudson line. So you can see again this dual imagery all in the friezes around the statue of the anchor for the Commodore and then the trains and the wheels for the trains. And that's going to be the symbol that will follow Vanderbilt all around. It's going to be the wheel and the anchor. And we see that in many manifestations in Grand Central today. Now, this was supposed to be put into the depot. And this was the depot, which opened in 1871. And the idea is that Vanderbilt had to put all of his acquisitions, the Harlem, the Hudson, and the New Haven line, in one central location. Hence the name Grand Central, although I love it. I don't know if any of you are Saturday Night Live fans from back in the 90s, but Mike Myers had a great character called Linda Richmond, who would always say when she needed to step off for a minute, the Holy Roman Empire was neither Holy Roman nor an empire discussed. Well, the New York Times wrote of this building, the Grand Central Depot is neither grand nor central because it was on the east side and it wasn't very big. But you'll notice in the center of the tower, there is what I used to call Mariana Half-Shell enclave for this statue of Cornelius Vanderbilt. But one thing you'll notice, there it is, pointing at it right there, it's never filled with Vanderbilt's statue. Vanderbilt's statue was put into storage, never placed in prominence in the center tower, because Vanderbilt was getting a lot of flack. Now, before we even talk about that, the Second Empire design of the depot was supposed to mimic the Louvre in Paris. And as you can see, it's sort of a much more American, watered-down version, but again, it was the same idea. I'm not going to tell you who the architect of Grand Central Depot is right now. Just hold on to that. This was a sketch, and the artist's name is escaping me. If anybody knows, please put it in the chat. If not, I will go back to my notes of the back train yard of the depot. Now, the reason why Vanderbilt's statue never got into the tower to have prominence looking over the street in front of the depot was because these trains were killing and maiming people on a regular basis because of the way that the rail was lined up outside of the depot and the way they would steam up 4th Avenue to Harlem. People who were trying to cross over the streets in their neighborhoods were regularly getting hit, killed, or badly injured. Almost, I believe it's over 2,000 would find themselves hurt by Vanderbilt trains. So the press, who was very, very harsh on Vanderbilt when the depot opened, said, when you put a monument to all the men, women, and children you've maimed with your trains, then you can put your monument up in the front of the depot. So that will also force Vanderbilt in 1877 to sink his tracks, which I know some of you know this story very well from tours and other talks that I've done. Vanderbilt sink your tracks, force Vanderbilt to do 4 tracks under Park Avenue or 4th Avenue, and he calls it Park Avenue because he gates it over and starts planting trees. Now, Park Avenue will evolve as Grand Central evolves as well, and that is another talk for another time. But the artist who cast Vanderbilt's statue was a name of Ernst Plastman. And there is another famous statue in New York that you may recognize that Ernst Plastman cast, and it is one of my favorites. It is Benjamin Franklin outside of Pace University. And a very, very different, you can see there's, whereas Vanderbilt is sort of slightly more, I don't want to say aggressive, there's more action in Vanderbilt. The Ben Franklin statue is a little bit more welcoming, sort of arms outstretched. He's holding a document. He's smiling. It's just a very different look. But Ernst Plastman had a really great way of showing the character of the figures that he was depicting. All right, so back to the map. Where are we going this time? Well, we're going to the eagles, and there are two eagles. I'm not going to spend too much time on the eagles because they're pretty straightforward, but you got to talk about them as part of the exterior art of Grand Central. There are two. There's one over the 42nd Street entrance and the corner of Vanderbilt. That's this one. This guy actually landed in 2002. He was donated back to the terminal, although they never lived on the terminal. They lived on the station iteration of Grand Central. And he was brought back. The Capuchin friars, who ended up taking over an estate in Garrison, New York, up in Putnam County, brought him back where he was perched right above the 42nd Street entrance. Now, these guys are cast iron. They're 4,000 pounds a piece. They don't look like they would be, but they are. They're very heavy. And they have a 13-foot wingspan. So you'll see here, this is a picture of the second iteration of Grand Central. After it was a depot for about 5-ish years, it was a station, the only time we call it a station. And this is where the eagles originally were. I could not find an artist in any of my research or notes that was associated with sculpting these, unlike the pen eagles, which I know very well, and I know Adolf Weinman sculpted these. There is no ready attribution. And again, if anybody has any of that information, please provide it in the chat. There is the second eagle. So the second eagle is right outside the Lexington Avenue passage, the entryway actually to the Grand Central Market, which has another piece of art we'll talk about in a little bit. And I'm going to say, for those of you who join me on a regular basis, I never like my photography because it's usually not great, but I took this photo and I really like this photo just because of the layers of the towers above the eagle. Was it intentional? Absolutely not. It just turned out that way and I love it. But this eagle was actually in a backyard in Bronxville for many, many years, and it was brought back to Grand Central in 1999 after the ribbon was cut on the fully restored Grand Central Terminal. Here's a close-up of it. There are other eagles spread out, mainly closer to New York, unlike the pen eagles, which are sort of all far afield, all over the place. There are Grand Central eagles at a private home in Kings Point, which actually there are pen eagles at Kings Point as well. And I believe there's an eagle up at the Sleepy Hollow train station. I have a friend who lives up there, and at the Vanderbilt Museum out in Long Island as well. And there were 12 of these in total, those eagles. Now let's talk about probably one of the main events of outdoor exterior art at Grand Central. You've got what most people, including I, refer to as transportation. Although it has two other names, it's also called the Glory of Commerce, and a much longer name, which I believe is progress with moral, nope, try that again. Progress with mental and physical force. That is the title of it. Not very memorable, but that's, of course, who these gods are depicting in this. You can see why most people just call it transportation. Glory of Commerce is pretty good, too. A lot of interesting stories tied behind this. This is a clearer picture. And just, I always like to tell people what they're seeing here. That's Mercury in the center with his arms outstretched. He's holding the caduceus, which is the double-snaked staff, which allows him to travel in between the world of the gods to the world of the mortals to deliver his messages. Now, Mercury is most closely associated with communication and commerce. He is the messenger god. And as you can see, he's astride an eagle. He's got wings on his hat for speed. So this is one of the things, commerce, obviously important in a train terminal and in New York, but also speed because of the speed of the trains. Now you have Minerva on what you are looking at to be his right side. She has her hand on her head. She also has a piece of parchment and a pen in her hand, and there's a globe on the other side of her. Which is rarely seen when we actually see this on the tour. We never loop around enough to see the globe, but she is symbolizing wisdom. And the buffed out guy holding the hammer, that's Vulcan, who is the god of forging and fire. And again, if you put all of these elements together, you have sort of the ingenuity, which helped not only to build Grand Central Terminal, but also the empire of the New York Central Rail and also the Vanderbilt Empire. And then, of course, it's all supposed to symbolize the ingenuity and capitalism of America in the early 20th century. A lot going on. Now, it's huge. One of these things I always like to say is, it's 48 feet tall, 66 feet across. It, for many years, was the largest sculptural grouping in the world. I think it might even still be the largest sculptural grouping in America. But we don't get that sense from looking down on the street at it. Now, it was designed by this man, Jules Coutin, and he was a Beaux-Arts sculptor. There's going to be 3 Parisians who are going to affect Grand Central Terminal with their art, and he is the first we will speak about. And he, as you could tell by this very stern look, didn't like America very much. And it was rumored that he would not set foot in New York because he was afraid that New York architecture would distress him. So he devised this quarter scale model of the grouping and sent it to America. And it was put together, I love this, in Queens. It was put together in Long Island City. And this is a great picture. You can see again the scale of how large this sculpture was. And at, again, 48 feet and 48 by 66, this thing's huge. And look at how large the workshop was. So it was sent to the workshop of William Bradley and Sons. John Donnelly was the head sculptor who was on the job, but he also had a team of others who were working with him, obviously, to put this together. And as you could see, it was modular. It was in multiple parts and then brought over to the terminal to be installed a year after the terminal opened. I love this picture because, these are gods, and they certainly seem like, if you met them and they were alive, they're gods compared to the size of the men in the room. And this was when they brought them over. Obviously, they brought them over in pieces. They hoisted them covered. Really, I love this picture. And then the next picture, again, from the Whitney Warren papers up at Columbia. Here is a signed photo from Whitney Warren to J.P. Morgan on July 19 in 1914. Again, roughly a little over a year after the terminal opened, saying the last stone of Grand Central Terminal. And you can see all of the guys on top, and they're like little ants. Totally cool. I love it. And it's one of the things I think about Grand Central. We tend to, as New Yorkers, especially who use the terminal quite a bit, we tend to ignore, because we don't usually approach Grand Central where we can see it from, Park Avenue south heading north. And we're always sort of scuttling in on the side of the building, and we never take time to stop and look at it. And it's one of my favorite parts of the tour, is bringing people outside and saying, this thing's massive and it's beautiful. And of course, you see at the foot of Vulcan, an anchor and a wheel. I was also rumored, by the way, before I'll go back, why not, that William K. Vanderbilt, who was the son of Cornelius, who was, again, bringing the New York Central to the height of its power with the terminal and electrifying the entire rail network, that he also felt that these were symbols, all 3 of these gods were the symbols of the Vanderbilt family and their values. So this was also meant to be a gigantic Vanderbilt family crest in a way. All right, so I love this one. I had a little bit of fun here. When I put these together, sometimes it's like 11 o'clock at night. So you'll see all of the arrows are pointing all over everywhere. And that's because I'm pointing out the acorns and oak leaves to sort of transition over to the idea that a lot of the sculptural accents all throughout Grand Central Terminal were sculpted in, again, the honor of the Vanderbilt family from this idea of the acorn and oak leaf, which becomes the crest or part of the crest of the Vanderbilt family. But I don't think this guy ever gets any good credit. And he really should, because his name is Sylvain Sallier. And I had Augustin tell me how to pronounce that right, so I hope I did. And he was the third in the trio of Parisian artists who was brought over by Whitney Warren to work on the terminal. And unlike Coutin, who would not even come to New York, and we are going to talk about Helleu, who only spends a couple of weeks in New York, this guy has to and wants to moved from Paris and lives for 5 years in New York, working on Grand Central Terminal specifically. And he is responsible for all of the sculpted accents all throughout Grand Central, all of them. That includes the lunettes over the windows. That includes all of the horns of plenty, the elevators, everything. And he was certainly, again, a prolific guy. So you see here the wings and the wheel, the speed of the trains, and of course, the bouquets of acorns and oak leaves and the lunettes of the windows. There's also the other sculpture, which I do not have a picture of, is also of the caduceus, the staff of Mercury. So all of these were Salieres. Really, really beautiful attention to detail. Again, there are the window moldings, again with the GCT. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why Grand Central is just such a feast for the eyes, is because everywhere you turn, something is sculpted and it's facing you. And you get so almost overstimulated by it that you don't even realize it's there, which is why, again, one of my favorite things to talk about on the tour is the acorn and oak leaf, because once you know it's there, it's everywhere. It's in the grills along all of the windows. And again, that's all Salieres. It comes from the saying, which I don't know if I mentioned already, great oaks from little acorns grow. Great oaks from little acorns grow, which was what Vanderbilt considered himself, being a poor farm boy growing into that very rich great oak. And again, this is around the water fountains and all of everything on the ceiling as well, all of those moldings, which, by the way, are being repainted and restored right now at Grand Central. If you go to Grand Central, you'll see the west half of the concourse is completely scaffolded right now as they are doing restoration work on there, mainly painting. The paint was peeling quite badly. And next, let's talk about the ceiling. So we're inside. We've been inside for a while. Forgot to mention that. But the original idea for the ceiling of the main concourse of Grand Central Terminal was a skylight. Whitney Warren wanted to put in a giant skylight to let light in to the concourse, but he was talked out of it. A, it was a lot more expensive than they thought it was going to be, and B, they figured it really was going to be quite a nightmare to maintain, especially if you had long winters with a lot of snow on top of it, or rain. It was going to leak. So he got talked out of it. He also so happened to be friends with this gentleman, who was Beaux-Arts painter, Paul Helleu, Paris-based. And he said to Helleu, why don't we do a mural and bring the sky into Grand Central Terminal? This is a painting of Helleu called A Woman in White. Very crisp. If you look at Helleu's art catalog or his collection, you'll see Helleu loves to use, in certain ways, sometimes sparingly, sometimes in great effect, the color blue. Different shades of blue, lots of blue. Blue's my favorite, which makes him obviously stand out. And obviously, you can see the use of blue, or the very, very specific blue he used for the ceiling, which was more of a greenish blue. Now, this is a full ceiling view after it had been restored. I believe this photo is from the year 2000, I think. And this is what the New York Times had to say of the ceiling when they first saw it in 1913. There are 2,000 stars of various magnitudes, while the great stars which mark the signs and constellations, some 63 of them will be illuminated by electricity. The reason why I use this photo and not a bunch of other photos that I have or that we have in the collection from Untapped is that you can see the stars are really, really bright, the lit stars, which it's tougher now to recognize that currently in the ceiling. The 63 stars are not that bright. They were switched over to LED a couple of years ago so that they would have a burn time of about, I believe it's 15,000 hours a bulb. And these were fiber optics back then. And I remember, again, being a college student, walking into the newly restored terminal and in the concourse looking up at the sky, and the stars were so bright. They were so amazing. I feel like they've shrunk a little bit. maybe that's my imagination, but there they are. And of course, the idea behind this was to bring notice to the public in 1913 that the New York Central was completely electrified. Everywhere from the ceilings to the trains to the light fixtures, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, electric power was driving the New York Central Railroad. Now, of course, there's so many myths and legends and stories to the ceiling. This is a Paul Helleu rendering of the painting. Now, Paul Helleu used an astronomical drawing called Uranometria, which was done in 1603 by a German astronomer by the name of Johannes Bayer. Paul Helleu wanted to be very, very, very specific about this mural. He wanted it to depict the night sky, the Mediterranean night sky in October. And so he wanted to make sure that the positions of the constellations were just right. Now, there are a couple of gaffes that he didn't realize there was one major gaffe that he didn't realize his source material was working with. In the 1603 Uranometria, Johannes Bayer actually turns Orion around to face the bull. So you'll see the bull of Taurus, which I know I don't have a cursor to show you. And then there's Orion with the club, and Orion is supposed to be facing the other direction. But Bayer turned him around so that it would almost look like he was facing the bull. Now, the biggest gaffe was when Helleu comes to begin the painting process in Grand Central on the ceiling, what he does is he puts the painting on the floor, and the transposition of the painting gets completely flipped around so that the only thing facing the right way is actually Orion. Everybody else is backwards. There has been a lot of, oh, by the way, I forgot to switch the slide. There you go. So there is the Uranometria from 1603. On the other side is the actual Orion that is there today. I also want you to take note of the picture of today to see that the panels that make up the ceiling are pretty visible there. You can see square panels. They are concrete and asbestos combination. That's another sort of secret of the mural we'll talk about literally in one slide. But there was a lot of talk about whether or not this flip of the mural was intentional. Some people had thought, well, Helleu could not have made that big a mistake without it being intentional. He actually brought on Harold Jacobi, who was a professor of astronomy at Columbia University, to check the accuracy of everything. Jacobi signed off on it. Everybody, it's probably Jacobi actually, everybody seemed pretty confident. And obviously they went ahead and they painted the whole thing without sort of stopping and going, oh no, it's wrong. And a month later, an amateur astronomer who was a New Rochelle commuter stopped and said, oh, you guys, you know that's backward, which forced the New York Central to sort of figure out a spin, because the New York Central was putting out pamphlets and ads in papers saying that school children from all over the country would be able to come to study the accuracy of the night sky in Grand Central Terminal. And of course, it's completely turned around. And the New York Central people said, well, you know, that's intentional because no mortal would ever get this view. This is the view of God looking down on mortals. And, you know, the whole thing was, you know, when you're a New York Central patron, you're a god, blah, 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 blah. It was all BS. There's a great book, which I know I've recommended in other Grand Central programming. It's called Grand Central, How a Train Station Transformed America. It's by Sam Roberts, a great author about New York centric history. And he actually went and he interviewed a bunch of people who may have had, you know, opinions about the mural and its accuracy. And he actually interviewed Susan Jacobi, who about her great uncle, the Columbia professor, who said, you know, basically, why didn't Jacobi catch this? And she said, quote, that her great uncle was the Jacobi man. And Jacobi men, all of whom possess a bent for mathematics, also have a tendency towards absent-mindedness and disorganization. On the critical detail of exactly where to place the chart while reproducing it on the ceiling, Michelangelo may have lain on his back to paint the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel, but no one ever noticed him holding a brush in one hand and a sketch in the other. So the idea was, well, it just seemed right. You put the sketch on the floor. The idea is consensus usually shifts more towards that it was a mistake, which was never corrected. but there are differing views. Here's a picture from, I believe this is the opening night of the terminal in 1913. And if you look closely at the mural, I know it's hard to see, but the original mural was painted directly onto plaster. The mural that we see today at Grand Central was actually a replacement. And as you can see here, this picture from 1944, after about 15 or so years, the mold and damage, leakage from rainwater and snow on the roof was starting to really have its wear and tear on the ceiling. And you can see it where there is no scaffolding. You'll just see how it's peeling and crumpling up and warping. So in 1944, amidst World War II, they brought in a whole group of artists to repaint the mural. Now, what they had to do first was they had to put those asbestos panels and concrete panels up. Now, you'll also notice one thing, they made some additions. If you're looking at the ceiling while you're standing there, there is two triangles, that's triangulum major and triangulum minor, which we see today. If you go back, sorry to give you whiplash, you'll see the original Hell U only has triangulum major. But the painters from later on in the 40s decided they were going to put in triangulum minor. And so it is there today. No reason as to why. Maybe they thought it was slightly more accurate. Maybe they referenced charts a little bit later on and thought, hey, why not do it? But one of the really great stories from this mural comes from the restoration process. A company, John Canning Corporation out in Connecticut, was hired to restore the ceiling, which was suffering from years of pollution, mainly from car emissions and cigarette smoke, and a whole bunch of other pollutants. So they went in and they restored the mural painstakingly using a very simple solution of basically baking soda, a little bit of citric acid, and pH balance rags. You'll see where the crab claw is pointing is the legendary black patch that they left behind to show the general public what the ceiling looked like in total. But here's another thing. Oh, and I had an arrow. Sorry, there it is. One of the things that does not get discussed very much, which is my favorite story about the ceiling, is that the painters who were restoring the mural in 1944 were also writing messages after they were finishing the mural. Now, a couple of things they also did. They made the constellation slightly less detailed. And in that way, they thought they were making them welcoming. There was a lot of detail in the Hell U painting. They also changed the color of the blue. Hell U's blue was more green than blue. They made this turquoise pop a little bit brighter, which we know today. But then every time they finished a mural, they would write a little message in it. So there are messages in that ceiling for the day that the war ended. There are messages of babies' names in there. My favorite is next to Gemini, the twins. Somebody put twin grandchildren born today. And just so you don't think I'm whistling Dixie, this was a picture from John Canning Corporation's website of In the Eye of Pegasus. This is just somebody simply signing their name after it is done, one of the artists. Really, really cool. Apparently, the World War II message is somewhere dead center of the ceiling, I believe. One of these days, I'm going to bring a really powerful set of binoculars in there and try to find some of them, because they're all there. They left them there. Canning said it only took 5 cans of paint to restore that mural. All it needed was a good scrub. All right, so I'm using a different map. This is a 1939 cross-section of Grand Central Terminal. So to bring us up to where the art school and art gallery was. This has become quite a famous little spot in the past couple of years because of Fiona Davis's book, The Masterpiece, a lot of which takes place in the art school. One of the main characters is a female artist at the school. I also think this map is art itself, gorgeously frameable. And it is where the navy blue arrow is pointing, because the turquoise blue arrow sort of got lost up there. It's the loft space 6th floor G. That's where we're going. That's John Singer Sargent. John Singer Sargent was one of the founders of the art school and galleries. Just in case you don't know who John Singer Sargent is, he was probably one of our most famous painters at the time. He spent most of his time as an expatriate, though. He didn't spend a lot of time in America, mainly in Europe. In London, he died in London, I believe. But Portrait of Madame X was probably one of his most famous portraits, and it was also on display for a while at the Grand Central Art School. But one of his, my favorites of his is, of course, Teddy Roosevelt. And the story behind the Teddy Roosevelt portrait was he was actually walking around the White House with Teddy Roosevelt trying to find a spot to put his portrait that he would paint. And Teddy Roosevelt was getting really impatient with him, and he loved the look on his face, and he told him to turn around right where he was standing. That was going to be the portrait. I love that. And Teddy does look a little pissed, doesn't he? I have a great Teddy sweatshirt. But this is a picture of what the galleries looked like. They were extremely large, 14,000 square feet. It was one of the largest gallery spaces in the country. And again, John Singer Sargent, William Leighton Clark, and a couple of other artists got together to start this school. The school had a shorter life. I think it was 1923 to right about 1944-ish was when the school was open. It had at its height up to 400 students at a time. Charles Addams was one of them, the sketch cartoonist who created the Addams Family. And Daniel Chester French, the sculptor who I talk about a lot on a lot of tours, was also one of the heads of the school for a period of time. Now, when they started the school, they also started a nonprofit. And the nonprofit was, the idea behind the nonprofit was to help to get patrons for young artists. And it basically brought upon this idea that artists were really bad businessmen and businessmen were really bad artists. So what we'll do is we'll create a nonprofit that would help both to appreciate each other. And that was all, again, centered here on the 6th floor of Grand Central Terminal. And it was called the Painters and Sculptors Gallery Association. And what would happen is if you were an artist, you had to contribute, I believe it was one piece a year for 3 years to be a member of the group. And if you were not an artist, you had to pay $600 each year for a piece of art from the artists. And what that did was is it helped, again, people to be able to grow their art collections from up-and-coming artists if they weren't artists, and artists to get patrons and support themselves. Here's a map of the galleries. I'm going to take a quick drink. I'm really dry mouth, sorry. So absolutely huge, upwards of 20 galleries, smaller gallery spaces. Here's a nice, bright, airy space. And of course, they advertised that there was direct above light coming down, ambient daylight coming from above, because it's the top of the terminal. It's the top floor. The president of the New York Central Railroad, Alfred Smith, not to be confused with Al Smith, the other Al Smith, he was a member. He was also, again, because he was president of the New York Central at the time, he also gave them a very good deal on a 10-year lease for the school. Now, this organization will continue, the nonprofit will continue up until the 1990s, but they will not use the 6th floor of Grand Central Terminal. They'll use the Biltmore Hotel up until the 80s, and then they'll go up to, or the 70s, and then they'll go up to 57th Street until the organization is disbanded in the early 1990s. And this is what it is today. Highly secured train traffic control up on the 6th floor, where they are monitoring all of the train movement of the Metro North, and also apparently security throughout the terminal as well. You cannot get there. I know a lot of people who had read the book were trying, they'd ask me questions on how do you get to the art school? You don't. It is keypad in the elevator. You have to have the right credentials to even get the elevator to bring you up there. Sorry. All right, so let's go to the Gray Bar Passage. And the Gray Bar Passage has this really, really wonderful mural. Again, this mural goes unseen by so many people who either don't pay attention to it or just bolting right under it, not even knowing that there's a mural there. This mural was supposed to be part of a series. You'll notice when you're in the Gray Bar Passage, there are a series of blank vaults from Lexington leading into the Gray Bar Passage. The Gray Bar Passage was built later on in the late 20s to connect Grand Central to the Gray Bar building, which at the time that it was built, I believe it opened in 1928. It was the largest office building at the time. This was done by Edward Trumbull, who was a great Art Deco muralist. And this is the only mural that got painted. The others were supposed to have sky in them. I believe they were supposed to be blue skies with clouds, again, as an homage to the great mural out in the concourse, but it never happened. Only Edward Trumbull's mural happened. And it is just called the Gray Bar Passage mural. It doesn't have any other name than that. That's what Trumbull named it. And of course, what it is, again, like transportation outside, it's showing all of the latest innovations. As you can see right above the chandelier, that's supposed to be a depiction of the High Bridge, so the Croton Aqueduct with trains running under it. They're also building a building. They're erecting a skyscraper on the right side of it. It's very hard to photograph, which some say was the Chrysler building, because at the same time that Trumbull was painting this, he was also painting, and I have a picture of it, I think one of his greatest works, which is the Chrysler building mural. And again, it has a it has a different color depending on which way you take a picture of it and which way the light's going. You can see here, it's a little bit more, I think this was more of a color treated photo. This one was actually Augustine's from Untapped in New York. And it's faded over time to have kind of a little bit of a tan look to it, like almost like a light caramelizing, which is another favorite thing about it. It looks like it's almost painted onto the stone. And there was a depiction, which Trumbull was very proud of the spirit of St. Louis, because at the time, this was the height of transportation technology and science. Planes, you know, here we have these biplanes, we're taking man to the sky. Of course, that will be the downfall of trains for a while. But this is Edward Trumbull's mural in the Chrysler building, which he was roughly designing and painting at the same time. This was just a really, really beautiful example of Trumbull's prowess, especially with Art Deco art. And he was considered, he died in 1968 in the New York Times. In his obituary, said of him that he was a traditional artist, which in 1968 meant he was painting Art Deco, but it was not traditional at the time. He was also, interestingly enough, he was the color tone director of Rockefeller Center, which means he was basically helping to unify color palettes over at Rockefeller Center. This is actually the last stop on the Grand Central Secrets tour, but this will only be a brief stop on this tour. The Grand Central Theater, which is now Central Cellars, was an intimate 200-seat little theater, but it had a appointment area out in the front of it, which was actually designed by Tony Sarg. And for those of you who joined me back in November for the Thanksgiving parade program that we did, you know, Tony Sarg designed, he was a puppeteer and artist. He was an illustrator. And I think Pete Tannen, who is on this today, had an aunt and uncle, I believe, who worked for Sarg. Sarg designed this room. And most likely, although there's no direct attribution, probably painted this mural, which was uncovered after years of being covered when they did the restorations in the 1990s. And this mural, which hung in the appointment area in the front of Grand Central Theater, was supposed to, again, be a play off of the mural in the concourse, Helleu's concourse, which I think is really cool that Tony Sarg designed this room and most likely painted this mural. He's a really interesting figure. Okay, now we are going to technically leave Grand Central just for a minute to go to the entryway to the MetLife building, what was then known as the Pan Am building. Now we have joining us on this talk today, like we do many talks, Richard Roth Jr., who at the time Emery Roth and Sons was overseeing the design and construction of the Pan Am building, worked very closely with all of the players, including Walter Gropius, who Walter Gropius was the founder of the Bauhaus School. And that's how he comes in contact with this German artist, Josef Albers, who was also a good friend of Richard's as well. Richard, I know you're with us. If there's anything you want to add in the chat, please do. But Albers and his wife, they come over from Germany in the 1930s and just absolutely love the energy and vibrancy of New York. Obviously, it calls to artists in so many ways. And later on in the 1950s, he's called upon to design what he calls Manhattan, which was a mural which he had already designed for Gropius during his time at the Bauhaus School. And Richard really tells a great story about how nervous Albers was that Gropius might actually re-recognize this when he turns it into a mural for the entryway into Grand Central from the Pan Am building. He designed a 486 panel Formica mural to hang over the doors. This was what the original looked like. And again, Richard tells the story great. He was, so nervous about it. And it seemed to me, and Richard, you could back me up in the stories that you told of him, that he seemed like he was a very nice man and a gentle soul. And he was really afraid Gropius was going to just, ride him out on the rails about reusing it. But it seems like Gropius never figured it out, and he put it up, and it was well loved. It's a very impressively sized mural. It stops you dead in your tracks as this woman, as you can see in the original, looking at the original mural, felt. It was taken down when MetLife took over the building in 2000. They basically said, it wasn't useful for them anymore. I guess they just didn't think it fit with the taste of what they were going for. But Tishman Speyer comes in and takes over the building in 2005 and decides they want to restore it. The problem is when it was taken out, they found behind the Formica asbestos, and not only very few of the original panels survived. So they completely redid the mural, and it was unveiled again in 2019. And shockingly enough, once again, this is a photo I took recently, a couple of weeks ago, right after Richard told the story. I went back and I went into the Pan Am building and I took a photo of it. And it's not easy to take a photo of it without the pillar being in the way. But our photographer, Ilka Mueller, did a pretty good job there. And again, the other story that Richard tells is how, and this is also in Nicole's piece about this, which was run last week, I believe, how he was just obsessed with color. And he'd sit and he'd look at the same colors over and over for hours. And Richard said, it looks like red to us. And of course, you never say that to an artist because there's so many implications as to what that could mean. But I highly suggest if you're in Grand Central, just walk through the doors at the top of the escalators and turn around. It really is an arresting mural. And this is a picture from Robin Roth, Richard's daughter, who sent this to me a couple of months ago from under the mural. Really, really cool. Also, just so you know, Richard and Robin and I have been having a series of recorded discussions. We did one on the Pan Am building. We just did one on the Palace Hotel and the Helmsleys, which insiders we are going to be putting into the archives directly in a couple of weeks. They've been a lot of fun, these conversations. All right. Thank you, Richard. Moving on. Station Master's office. So we're going to start moving. This is the last leg of the tour. We're going to start moving underground. So we've been outside, we've been inside, we've been looking at the ceilings a lot and looking up. And now we're going to start going underground to end the tour. And everybody knows, who knows me well, I thrive underground. First, we'll be in the Station Master's office, which technically is not underground. But this piece, we start getting into the MTA Arts and Design territory now. And this is called A Field of Wildflowers, and it was installed during the restoration in 1997 in the Station Master's office. It's by Roberto Juarez. And his idea was to create sort of a meditative place of rest mainly because it's one of the few places in Grand Central Terminal where there are benches still to sit. There is also a women's room in there, by the way, which is much better than the women's room downstairs. And those are wildflowers, and they are painted to look as though you are seeing them out of a train window going by very slowly. That was Juarez's idea behind it. This is a photo of Juarez at work. And what he said about it is the work itself is unique. Actually, I should caveat this by saying the MTA considers it to be one of their most delicate pieces in the entire system. It's because it is, quote from Juarez, consisting of layers of gesso, underpainting, urethane, and varnish. I also utilize natural materials like rice paper and a dusting of peat moss to give my work added texture, strength, and beauty, end quote. So this is not a mosaic. It's not glass. It's not tile. It's not metal like we see being used in the system very often. It's actually almost like a plaster of Paris, which is then painted and layered with materials. And the flowers themselves are actually reminiscent of a lot of the flowers that you see around Grand Central Terminal that would be sort of in the the braids above the elevators and the horns of plenty. And then also, of course, acorns and oak leaves are also shown. They're kind of hidden in there. It's very soft, very beautiful. And unfortunately, if you walk into Grand Central Terminal, you cannot see it today. They've built a wall, a temporary wall at the front of the station master's office, so that the only things accessible in the station master's office right now are the restrooms for the ladies and an information kiosk. They don't want people in there during the pandemic sitting, so they've closed it off. So hopefully we'll be able to see this again soon. Okay, so Vanderbilt Hall. This is what I was speaking about before. One of the things that sort of inspired me to do this talk was this art exhibit, which only lasted for 2 days in Vanderbilt Hall back in January, this January, 2021. And it's called The Da Vinci of Debt. And it is made up of 2,600, precisely, real diplomas, which give it a complete grand total of the cost of the education, all added up together to $470 million. So it is a piece of art worth $470 million based on the diplomas. The diplomas are real. Hundreds of people, they made a call out on social media for people to lend their diplomas. They were rented for the cost of $100 a diploma, and they were used temporarily for this exhibit. Now, it's called the Da Vinci of Debt because the most expensive piece of art is Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, which had been sold for $450 million. This is just a show-stopping slide, I think. Hard to move on from. And the idea was to create something in worth more expensive. Now, interestingly enough, this piece of art does not really have one artist you can attribute it to. It was sponsored by the Anheuser-Busch company, Natural Light, or as the college kids used to call it, including myself, Natty Light. Natty Light was probably the most watered down version of light beer you could find, and really cheap, so that's why college kids liked it. Interestingly enough, Natural Light has put together a student loan hero program, which is a relief program where they raise, I think, over $200 million to provide student loan relief for those who cannot pay their student loans back. And there's a contest, which I believe currently is going on for those who are paying student loan debt off, that Natty Light will help you to pay your loan bills if you apply, and I believe you have to write an essay. But one of the things about this art is not the art itself, but these are all my pictures. I was able to go in, I took a picture from the center. It's obviously designed to be highly Instagrammable, to be used on social media handles, but it just shows you how timeless Grand Central is as a canvas for art. Every one of these pieces, pictures look good, and they look good because of Grand Central. So it's just a really great home for art, even if the art is something that they put up in about, I think she said, the representative said they put it up in about 5 hours, let it live for 48, and then took it down again. And again, it's sort of supposed to be a cyclone. There are piles of diplomas, which are supposed to be blown in the wind. And moving on. All right, the trees. I said we were moving underground, but almost. This is in the Grand Central Market, which was opened back in the late 90s when they restored Grand Central. This was actually a baggage storage area for many years. And then it becomes a bank in the 70s, and then they turned it into Grand Central Market, which is a great place to buy bread and cheese, so says me. This tree, which is supposed to be obviously an upside down tree, it's called Shavasana, which is a yoga term. I do yoga, but I do not do this pose. It's an upside down tree. I haven't gotten there yet. And it is 5,000 Austrian crystals hanging from it to catch the light from the day. And it's done by Donald Lipsky, a very playful sculptor. It was installed in 2000, right after the market opened. And there's actually Shavasana, the upside down tree being done in practice. I'm good at tree pose upwards. I'm not good on my head. And there it is. It's not electrified, by the way, but they do have lights cast on it to make it look almost like it is lit. And it is really gorgeous. I think either in the morning, early in the morning, I've seen it really early in the morning, or at night when they start artificially lighting it. This is one of the newer installations of Donald Lipsky's work. It's on 34th. It is at the NYU Langone Medical Center, the Hassenfield Children's Hospital. And it literally, when I first saw it, I almost drove off the FDR. I was coming home from Jersey to visit my parents, and I see it. You could see it from the FDR. And, there's this yellow cab with a Dalmatian balancing it on its nose. I absolutely love it. Same sculptor. All right, almost done, guys. We're going to go to the subways. So there's 3 subway pieces of art. These are the ones that got most unrecognized. And first, so we're going to go to my subway map now. We're going to go from Grand Central to Subway. And we're going to talk about the shuttle first. And this is an old piece of art from 1990. And it's called Fast Track and Speed Wheels. It's by Dan Sinclair, who's actually from Canada. He's a Canadian artist who obviously is a blacksmith and a metalworking artist. And the idea behind this was to create in different metal forms, wheels and pistons to simulate the speed of trains. And the idea is you were going from Grand Central into the shuttle. And this seemed like as good a spot of any to talk about the speed of trains and to do the allusion to wheels. What Dan says about this sculpture, quote, "I want my sculpture to make people think of the power of the engines that drive the trains, the speed and efficiency of them. The sculptures also reflect the architectural elements of Times Square and the Art Deco glamour of Radio City Music Hall." So one of the things I love about this is he's a Canadian artist. And of course, most people from outside of New York think, well, okay, Radio City Music Hall is right there, and Times Square and are all right on top of Grand Central. And of course, the New Yorkers, although they're close, they're not that close. And he also did pieces on the tile walls. And again, from being done in the 90s, these still look good. They still wear very well. That almost looks like a symbol. It is actually not a symbol. I thought it was a symbol, but it was, again, cast specifically for this to look like a wheel. All right, and then moving on to the 7, in the passage of the 7 train, is a work called Arches, Towers, and Pyramids. This was installed in 2000, and it was done by artist Jackie Ferreira, who is currently 91 years old, still apparently at work. So she's very mathematical. She loves very simple shapes. She does a lot of stuff in wood, actually, and she does a lot of pyramids in wood. And she wanted to do almost like a film strip, which went up and down the passages from Grand Central Terminal down to the 7 train. And they're, as you can see here, they're bright. I always say they look kind of dot matrixy. They're very simple, but no two images are alike. And they're supposed to be, every time you take it from a different perspective, it should look totally different to you. She said that she wanted them to be meditative and lend unity to the space itself. But it's actually very different. But if you move quickly, which sometimes you're able to do, but not on rush hour, they do almost move like movie frames. She says, quote, "The sequence of stripe image is calculated. It can be seen as images on a strip of film or a line of faces framed in the windows of a passing train." Oh, sorry, I went forward. There it is. And then the newest piece, which if you joined me for Subway, the new Subway art piece, I am revisiting again, which was done by Jim Hodges. And again, I love the name of this. He calls it "I Dreamed a World and Called It Love." And it was installed this summer. And it is from the Lexington Avenue passage leading down to the 6 train. It's 2 giant colored cut glass sculptures over the stairs and the escalators. So there's a blue that greets you first, and that blue again is supposed to call back to the blue of the ceiling and the mural from the ceiling, like so many pieces of art in Grand Central do. And then at the bottom is more of a multicolored, very bright, almost like sunlight affair. So I went this Saturday. I was going to take maybe another picture, and it is covered. The bottom piece, the blue piece is not. The bottom piece is colored in plastic tarp. Not sure why. Hopefully nothing is wrong with it, but I tried to look it up to see if there's any news about it. There was none. It's just covered in plastic tarp. And then lastly, my last piece, my favorite piece, the most hidden of all of the pieces. As above, so below. And it's not even in what we would think is Grand Central. A lot of people don't even know this space exists. You'll see my arrow is off the map. Actually, it is in some place that was added on much later in the 1990s, although work for it started in the 1980s. It's the Northwest Passage of Grand Central Terminal. It's this passage that makes you realize the footprint of Grand Central is gigantic. It starts at 42nd Street and goes to about 51st Street. And this is the 47th Street passage. You can get to this passage by accessing stairs all the way at the end of the platforms. And then you just keep walking. You just keep walking. And you keep thinking, where am I going to end up? And it's done by Ellen Driscoll. Ellen Driscoll is a sculptor. She's from Boston native, I believe. Sculptor. She's taught at RISD. She got her, I think it was her BFA in sculpting from Columbia. Very, very accomplished. And really, this is just, to me, the symbols behind it are just phenomenal. And here it is. This is the 47th Street Northwest Passage of Grand Central Terminal. And every time I see it, this is a photo by Aaron Assis. I say, I think in the 90s, did Grand Central get, jealous of Penn? This looks like a very sort of, typical corridor you would see buried under Penn Station. But the idea was to give people in the upper 40s and lower 50s access to tracks of the terminal without having to go all the way down to 42nd Street. And so they commissioned Driscoll to do this. And there are many of these pieces scattered throughout the corridor. And it was installed in 1998. And the idea is we are underground. And again, hearkening to above being the mural of the stars Uranometria in the Grand Concourse. This is now as above, so below. And that is actually, for those of you who know hermetics or sort of the wisdom schools, hermetics say that whatever is seen above can also be reflected below, or, as in the macro, so in the micro. And the idea is you've got a universe, but you also have these very human figures sort of pushing the universe along. And it really, to me, is just, I love this. I love stars, and I love the idea of the universe being reflected in people. We are stardust kind of thing. And it reflects on the wisdom traditions and mythological creation stories of different civilizations throughout the planet. And there are plaques for each one of them. And then there are representatives, a very diverse group of representatives, almost like ghosts in the mosaics themselves, reflecting those founding myths. And here is sort of the cycle of a day going on with two Indian women. So there's a lot of Hindu allusions, again, a lot of Hermetic allusions, a lot of Egyptian, but then also, basic Western civilization mythological ideas as well. Here's a plaque. So every plaque denoting where the myth was from. And there it is, Africa. And there it is, an African man, sort of with the idea of the cycles of the universe within his gut, almost, within his being. Here we are. And this is my favorite. And I think it's probably the showcase of, pushing all of these layers of the universe down the hallway. And one of the things Driscoll said is she wanted people, as they were sort of rushing to their trains, to stop and say, wait a minute, is this really important? What's important is the fact that, we are part of a much larger universe. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I will end, an insider sent this to me. They reminded me of this poem at the end of one of the subway tours. I believe it was the Subway Art Tour. Billy Collins does Subway, which is one of my favorite poems to end with for each of the Subway and the Subway Art Tour. But this one can't beat this one. Billy, really great. Grand Central, the city orbits around 8 million centers of the universe and turns around the golden clock at the still point of this place. Lift up your eyes from the moving hive and you will see time circling under a vault of stars and know just when and where you are. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Questions, comments? Oh, also, I promised you a quiz if I didn't, and I don't believe I bleeped out, Nicole, so.
No, you were good. I didn't have to step in. So I do have some questions that people dropped in the chat.
Goody.
Let's start with those, and then we can look at the questions in the question tab. So Jeffrey wanted to know if the MetLife building is still called the MetLife building or if Tishman's renamed it yet.
That is a very good question. Yeah. It is still MetLife hanging right over the escalators. I believe it is still, but if anybody has any information about that, the naming, I mean, I have been referring to it as the MetLife building. Yeah, Robin says it's still MetLife.
Okay, next one, also from Jeffrey, wanted to know when, if you know when the renovation work will be complete that they're doing inside Grand Central.
Yes, good question, Jeffrey. So it's going to take them about a year aside. So they started the west side. I believe they started putting that scaffolding up in August or September. So by next fall, the west end of the concourse will be done, and they'll move on to the east end of the concourse. I can't wait to see what Apple's going to do when that happens. So it's going to take about 2 years for the whole thing to be complete.
Awesome. All right. This one comes from Janet about the constellations in the main concourse. She noticed the little B and wanted to know if that's an old constellation, because we don't really talk about the B constellation.
So the B constellation was actually it was considered to be its own constellation on its own until I believe the 1930s, when the Astronomical Association, I believe of America, if I'm getting that right, actually incorporated the B into Aries. And technically, B I don't think exists anymore as a constellation. I guess they have that power to create and destroy constellations. So I believe that's what happened to it. Ask me the next question, and I'll see if I can find. I believe that was written somewhere in Sam's book here.
Sure. So Janet also was interested in if you had any other resources where you can find out information about the messages that people left on the ceiling mural.
So the only place where that is actually on the web is John Canning Company's site. He has a great website with a blog where he talked about restoring the ceiling. And I actually called a representative years ago when I was putting together my version of the Grand Central Tour and talked to them in person over the phone about it. So Janet, I can. Well, let me see if I can find.
I have his website right here.
Okay, so yeah, definitely put the. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so you'll see he'll talk about those messages there. It's also spoken about. Bloomberg put out a piece, I believe, when Grand Central turned 100, but it's a small paragraph which I think they just borrowed from Canning. So go to Canning, and Canning will definitely have good information there.
Cool. So the last question from the chat was from Lorraine, and she wanted to know where the diplomas came from and how many there were.
Diplomas came from all over the country. They put messages out on social, and anybody anywhere could put their diplomas in. And again, everybody who got diplomas sent in and used were given $100. How many there were, I believe it was two. Hold on, I'm looking at my notes because so many numbers in my head. 2,600. I was going to say 2,400, but I would have been off by 200. So there are 2,600 of them.
Cool. And Sylvia and everyone, yes, this video will be put up in the Insiders Archive. So those are the questions I got from the chat. We can go to the questions tab now. We answered some of those. I believe you mentioned this in the talk, but the meaning behind the acorn and the oak leaf.
Yes.
Elise was asking about.
Yeah, so it comes from the Vanderbilt family motto, great oaks from mighty acorns grow. And the idea was, again, Vanderbilt was a very poor farm boy who grew into, the richest guy ever. And Vanderbilt money is still a thing, obviously. Anderson Cooper, Gloria Vanderbilt, all direct descendants.
All right, and we had another question from Peter Tanning. Can you say more about the symbolism in the cartoon you showed at the beginning? It showed Vanderbilt with a hose connected to a fire hydrant and someone else. I think he had a pump that said Erie Railroad. Yeah, so
the idea behind that was, I had mentioned before, let me see if I can go back there quickly. The idea behind it was that Vanderbilt started buying up local rail all over, the Hudson, the Harlem, the New Haven, and then he expanded the whole thing and started buying regional and then national rail. And he had so much money, he did so by basically being a bully. The hose is him washing out everybody else. And what he would do is he'd come in, he'd wait for the company to be, doing really poorly, then he'd buy out the leadership. And he was really considered to be a very aggressive businessman. Oh my Lord, why is this taking forever? Sorry. We'll get there. We'll get there. And he had a very ruthless nature to him. And this was depicting the fact that he did whatever he needed to do to increase the power and access, here it is, of the New York Central. And again, he created the New York Central by buying the Erie, buying the New York, the Hartford, New Haven. And then he had, at his death, almost supremacy over the East Coast. His biggest competitor was the Pennsylvania Railroad, which, if it wasn't as big as it was, would have also succumbed to him. But the Pennsylvania Railroad was actually slightly, if you want to split hairs, more powerful than the New York Central. Pennsylvania hit the billion profit mark before New York Central did. And what he's doing is he's washing out the rail lines so that they, couldn't, whatever line he wanted to buy, he'd sort of devalue them and then buy them up.
Yes, I'm actually reading, I just was looking over to get the name of the book, Fortune's Children, The Fall of the House of Vanderbilt right now. So all about his dealings with the railroads and stuff like that.
Yeah, he was, ruthless. He had a very ruthless persona to him. The Vanderbilts got better as they got older. The subsequent generations were slightly more altruistic, and they sort of lived off of his legacy for many years after But the Vanderbilts we'll revisit the Vanderbilts in the Lost New York mansions, Fifth Avenue mansions.
Yep. I'm up to the part in the book where they're talking about Alva and her mansion.
Oh, so. Alva was crazy. I mean, Alva was the one who was insistent on creating this iconography about the Vanderbilts. She's the one who pushes the acorns and oak leaves. That's her thing.
Nice. All right, so I think we got to all the questions.
Mm-hmm.
I just dropped some links in the chat to our Secrets of Grand Central walking tour and also some upcoming virtual events, which we're doing. Next week, we have a book talk on Carole King's New York with the author Lauren Glass. And on Wednesday, we're going to go inside some of New York City's factories with photographer Chris Payne. So that'll be very exciting.
Ooh. All right, we've got 35 people here. Does anybody want to do the 3-question quiz that we put together? So did we tell the story? I don't remember now.
No.
So in the event that my internet connection crapped out on us, I had Nicole ready with 3 questions to quiz you guys while we were waiting for me to reboot. So why don't we try it? The first person to answer each one correctly will get not the old, but we have new Untapped New York tote bags that just came in. So we'll send you a new tote bag. Nicole, why don't you read the questions? Because I don't have them in front of me. Do you have them?
All right. Yeah, I do. We're going to throw them all out at once.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. All right. Question number 1. What is a transportation sculpture on the 42nd Street facade of Grand Central Terminal carved from? That's question 1. Here's question 2. Who was the architect of Grand Central Depot? And number 3, what was the track number and departure time of the New York Central's famed 20th Century Limited? I'll go through them one more time. First person to get all 3. Number 1, what is a transportation sculpture on the 42nd Street facade of Grand Central Terminal carved from? Number 2, who was the architect of Grand Central Depot? And number 3, what was the track number and departure time of New York Central's famed 20th Century Limited?
All right, so
we have a few answers coming in.
we do. Some of them.
Piece of paper. Let's see.
Some of you are. I'm going to tell you for architect, it's the depot, not the terminal. And I did not mention his name. I actually didn't mention any of this. This is on purpose. I didn't want you to feel like I was quizzing you. I am seeing correct. We do have some correct track. Although that was actually not the track that I was going for. I will accept it because it was used as well. But we also need the time. Come on, guys. I want to go to the post office. Anyway, I will say, Jeffrey Bernard, you were first. Limestone is correct. It was Indiana limestone. But I'll take that as a correct answer. So, Jeffrey Bernard, send me your address, and I will send you a tote bag. Morbo, you really are a Penzi guy.
No one's got the architect yet.
He's very little known.
Or the time.
Yeah, I figured people would have the time before they'd have the time.
I believe, walked by the architect's house, or I remember reading a plaque with his name on it.
Okay. His. Yeah.
Or I guess they were houses he designed.
He was very popular at that time. He was, sort of mid to late 19th. Second Empire. He loved the Second Empire, which Vanderbilt also did. All right, Robin, you've got half of it right. You got half of it right. Henry. It is Henry Snook.
Nice.
Howie, good job. And I think, so what I will do is, who gave 44 first? Was it
Janet?
Lauren? It was Janet. All right, Janet. We'll say 44. Actually, 35 was the preferred, was the one they tried to use the most, but they did use 44. They also used 29. So I would have taken 29, 44, or 35. They left at 6 p.m. So it was an overnight trip. It was a 6 p.m. trip. And if you watch North by Northwest, you'll hear them announcing the departure of the time, track 35, 6 p.m. For the 20th century. Robin, I'll send you a tote bag too, because you got Snook. And also for all of the pictures that you send me all of the time, the least I can do, I should send you a tote bag with a bottle of champagne in it. But I'll wait till we could actually do that in person. Yeah. Oh, thank you, everybody. So again, Jeffrey, let me cut and paste your address. Janet, please give me your address. You can email me or do it here if you want, if you don't want everybody to see it. Robin, just let me know what address you want your bag sent to as well. And again, you can email me at justin@newyork.com. Sorry, I'm doing two things at once. Untapped Cities. It's Untapped Cities. Sorry. And I think that's it, guys. This is thank you for joining us. Thank you, Richard, for being here and for your great stories. And I will see you guys again on Tuesday with Carole King and the author. Well, not with Carole King, but about Carole King, and then also with Chris Payne next week. Have a good one.
So, bye, everybody.
Bye.